Delighted to welcome from European Bioplastics their EU Policy Affairs Manager, Julie Pieters. Julie, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for sticking with us at this second day. My name is Julie Pieters, and as was already said, I work for European Bioplastics. And European Bioplastics is the European association representing bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastics. I am based in Brussels, and so indeed, I work in policy. I go to the Commission, the Parliament, the Council from time to time as well. And I thought today that it was good also to, in a sense, explain what is going to happen in the policy pipeline. And it was quite a bridge from the last presentation because it was also about market uptake. And I think in the last 3 years since joining EUBP, the word that I've used the most is market pull measures. What do we mean with this? Why do we need with this? Why do we need them? And that's why I am here today and what I would like to bring across to you. So first, I think we need to start with a reality check. Unfortunately, today, we are still only at 0.5% of global plastics when it comes to bio-based plastics. So we are still a very small market, and it's been difficult to get through that ceiling of the 1%. Bio-based plastics have been around for a long time now. So why today are we still at 0.5%? Because we still have significant hurdles, and I think during this conference, many speakers actually spoke on one or the other hurdle that is still challenging for them, difficult to get through. I think one thing is the debate on sustainable biomass availability. In a sense, I think this is probably the hurdle on which we made the most progress in the last 2-3 years. There's been many studies to show that there's enough availability today to start the transition. We don't need to go from every fossil production to all bio-based. That's not the intention, but we should start a transition and we should scale up faster than we do today. There's an unlevel playing field with fossil-based plastics. I think this is for you as an audience quite obvious. The fossil-based plastics industry has been there for over 100 years. They have the infrastructure, the value chain, the know-how, the lobby capacity, like the whole ecosystem is there. And for an emergent sector, it's still difficult to really get over that. One thing that was said earlier as well by the panel is that biomass use today is still heavily incentivized more in energy and fuels than in the material side. So you create an unlevel playing field that doesn't help the scaling of the bio-based plastics. And then why I am here today is there's a lack of demand and policy incentives. I have a beautiful slide, which I don't have today, in which I show where, in which policy files, policies and legislation, bioplastics fall under. And it's really a mix between waste policy, material policy, downstream, different sectors, and we have kind of plick-plock some policy incentives. And we need to find a way to harmonize this, but also find a way to make this more clear, both to the value chain, but also to consumers. We need to have clearer definitions, and we need to kind of together try to harmonize that better. Starting with some good news is the bioeconomy strategy. This was adopted in November 2025. And here, in a sense, you have the vision, where are we going? So by 2040, and we are today 2026, so this is in 14 years, sustainable bio-based materials and products are widely deployed in the EU. For me, this is not 0.5%. If you say widely deployed, let's hope we go further. The words you see in bold, affordable, competitive, and deployable at industrial scale. I think if in 2040 we can all be here together and say we are affordable, deployable at industrial scale, we don't need the conference anymore, to be fully honest. And cost competitive and scalable. And why is the bioeconomy strategy an instrument, a strategy that can help us? Because they are going to create lead markets for bio-based solutions, and bio-based plastics and polymers are the first lead market that is in the EU bioeconomy strategy. And one of the elements there is that they made the reference to the packaging and packaging waste regulation, where the Commission made the commitment, or the legislator made the commitment to speed up the legal possibility to have bio-based feedstock in plastic packaging. And I'll come back to that, but in principle, this is now on the agenda for 2027. And this is a signal that many of investors in bio-based plastics really needed, because there's a real urgency today to create this market, otherwise there won't be a market anymore. So when we speak about market pool, what does it actually mean? There's as you can see, you can have a toolbox of different market pool measures that go from clear demand creation to economic incentives to creating that level playing field. In a sense, this toolbox could handle or could alleviate the hurdles that I talked about before. There's no silver bullet solution. Depending on the end market, we might need more of one or of the other. What is clear for an industry association as European Bioplastics is that without binding bio-based content targets, we will not get there. So EPR, so extended producer responsibility, could for sure also be a very powerful market pool measure, but similar, you could say, like set up a credit system where you would valorize, for example, bio-based feedstock. You could say, okay, green public procurement, the public authorities should, if they have the intentions that they have, stimulate bio-based solutions and so on. And I think this slide here is probably the most important one of my presentation, because I think today we have momentum, we have opportunities, and especially in 3 policy areas we see opportunities. The first one is the PPWR, the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, where there is Article 8. And I would encourage everyone to read this article in a sense, because this is the legal hook to create in the future a bio-based content target and the use of bio-based feedstock in all plastic packaging. Why do I say this is a hook? Because it's not yet what target exactly. It's not yet what are the conditions, which sustainability criteria would you have to use. But the legislator told the Commission, dear Commission, please do a review of the current market situation. What is the technological status quo? What is the market situation today of bio-based plastic packaging? And then bring us a legislative proposal with targets that will increase the use, with sustainability criteria, and where we understand what the interplay will be between bio-based content and recycled content in plastic packaging. Because today, you already have an obligation to have, as of 2030, minimum recycled content. So how will these two interplay? This is the work now of the Commission, but also of the industry, because we need to provide input there. We need to tell the Commission what works in practice, what doesn't work, which model, which interplay would we like to prefer. So this is on the one side in packaging, and I would say the reflection is the furthest along in packaging. It's 50% of the bio-based plastics market, so this would be a huge win if we get to the mandatory targets there. Another one is the Biotech Act 2. I think in the introduction by Europa Bio, we already spoke about the act itself. The impact assessment is ongoing. The legislative proposal is still expected by the end of this year. Let's see if this is actually realistic, but it's still officially Q4 2026. And here, the idea would, of course, to see where can we create, or how can biotechnology and biomanufacturing help creating lead markets? And the other way around, how can a lead market enhance the use of biotech and biomanufacturing? And they are looking into other end markets than packaging, so the automotive sector, the textile sector, the construction sector, and here also mandatory bio-based content targets are one of the options. But it's not a given, because targets are often seen as market intervention. And as was said before also by one of the speakers, we are both in simplification, but also in some part trying to get more competitive and trying to get a sector, which is the biosector, by 2040, industrially deployable. So it's very difficult to bridge those two. But nevertheless, I think there's a real opportunity here, and we as a sector need to engage with the Commission, need to tell them what we want, need to continue to be present as much as, for example, a fossil-based sector would be present in these kind of consultations. A third pathway is the Critical Chemicals Alliance. So this is an alliance set up by the chemical sector together with, under the auspices, let's say, of the Commission, of DG GROW. Where they are looking into the strategic autonomy and the identification of critical molecules and value chains, but also there's a dedicated work stream on market creation for sustainable and low carbon molecules and chemicals, where of course here it's especially important that you have this recognition of bio-based chemicals and polymers as strategic materials that could bring Europe more strategic autonomy. Here, this work, we don't exactly know into which policy instrument it will feed into. So this is a risk of this alliance. Nevertheless, that work that is being done should be used because the identification of which measures work in which end markets is actually very valuable, and that could help, for example, in the Biotech Act 2, to provide input there. I come to the end of my presentation. Earlier, there was a question, is there real momentum in Brussels? Are policy makers really taking bio-based solutions seriously? I think here the response is really yes. And the fact that we have many Commission officials here today present during this conference is proof of that as well. They take it serious, they have the objectives. We know what we want. The big challenge now is to deliver and to get to the how do we get there. And so for me, we need to get the signals into substance as urgent as possible. I believe that if we have the creation of a real market in Europe, we will also attract investment in Europe and factories in Europe. Sectors might come back to Europe if we have the European market. I think PPWR Article 8 will be pivotal also for other market pool measures and targets in the future. I think this is somewhat a test case in packaging. And, you know, this might be a fluffy statement, but I think that we need to make sure together that there's delivery from the policymaker. We have our voice. We live in a democracy. We have our voice. We should use it. Bio-based plastics have a role to play. This is now clear. Now it's up to creating those conditions for the market to scale. Happy to engage later on, and otherwise I hope that everybody gets home safely, and maybe until next year. Thank you.